They appeared to be the perfect family, wealthy, educated, and deeply admired. Rosario Porto, a successful lawyer, and Alfonso Basterra, a respected journalist, opened their hearts and home to a baby girl from China, offering her every opportunity a child could dream of. Asunta grew up surrounded by privilege, excelling in academics, music, and ballet. But behind the closed doors of their elegant Santiago apartment, a chilling truth festered. What began as a promise of love turned into a nightmare filled with deception, manipulation, and unspeakable betrayal. By the time anyone realized the danger she was in, it was already too late. And the two people meant to protect her stood accused of something unthinkable. Let's unravel the harrowing case of Asunta Basterra Porto, a story that shook Spain to its core and still leaves more questions than answers. Rosario Porto and her husband, Alfonso Basterra, were wealthy individuals. Rosario's father served as an influential French consul, and her mother was an art teacher. Rosario followed in her father's footsteps and became a successful lawyer. In 1997, she was appointed French consul, inheriting the position from her father. Alfonso was a well-known journalist. He and Rosario married in 1996 and moved into a spacious apartment in an upscale area of Santiago de Compostela, Spain. Rosario suffered from lupus erythematosus, a condition that led doctors to advise against pregnancy. The couple decided to adopt a child who had been left in institutional care and offer her a nurturing home. Since adoption procedures in Spain were complicated, they chose to travel to China while in their early 30s. After navigating numerous bureaucratic hurdles, they arrived at an orphanage. Rosario immediately felt a connection to a 9-month-old girl, and within 2 weeks, they completed the necessary steps to officially adopt her. Upon returning to Spain, the child's documents named her Asunta Fong Yang. This was notable, as Asunta was one of the first children of Chinese descent adopted in the area. Initially, it appeared that she was fortunate to become part of a respected and affluent family. The happiness would prove to be short-lived. Asunta was an exceptionally bright child. She excelled in academics, studied multiple languages, practiced ballet, and attended music school. Rosario and Alfonso appeared determined to provide her with every opportunity for growth. On July 4, 2013, Rosario and 12-year-old Asunta went to the beach to cool off on a hot day. During the trip, Asunta recounted a disturbing story about a man in a black mask and gloves who had tried to harm her the previous night. As she continued to speak, her emotions escalated, and eventually, her mother began to cry. Rosario later admitted that she had known about the incident. She had been present, but for reasons unclear, she never reported it to the police. On the night of September 21, 2013, at 10:30 p.m., Rosario and Alfonso went to the police station to report Asunta missing. She had been unaccounted for several hours. At the station, Rosario also mentioned the alarming story Asunta had told her 2.5 months earlier, expressing fear that the individual involved might have returned. The couple feared that something terrible had happened. Alfonso believed that their daughter was no longer alive. They urgently pleaded with the police to act quickly. In the early hours of September 22nd, 2 men were driving through a forested area after leaving a bar. One of them noticed something strange and decided to stop. He felt a sense of unease, as though they were being watched, but brushed it off, perhaps due to the alcohol he had consumed. Curious, he stepped out of the vehicle and walked a few meters into the woods. Illuminated by the headlights, he spotted what looked like a doll. As he approached, he realized it was a young girl. She was lying motionless, with her clothing soiled and her limbs bound. Checking for a pulse, he confirmed that she had passed away. The men immediately called the police. The authorities identified the body as Asunta, who had died just a week before her 13th birthday. Nearby, they found her mobile phone, which contained unsettling photos. Several images showed her tightly restrained, with wide, unblinking eyes, possibly under the influence of a substance, according to forensic experts. Even more disturbing were photos that depicted the girl in inappropriate makeup and attire, posing in unnatural ways. Her expression remained vacant, with dilated pupils. These images later surfaced online, causing widespread outrage and raising serious concerns about the way this child had been treated. Asunta's last day was described by her parents as ordinary. The little girl suddenly went missing and was found dead just a few hours after they reported her disappearance. That day, she visited her father, Alfonso, at his workplace, and then hurried home because she didn't want to miss The Simpsons at around 7 p.m. After returning home, her mother, Rosario, came back from work and saw Asunta in her room with her books spread out on the floor, doing homework. Rosario didn't notice anything unusual and left shortly afterward to go to their country house, about half an hour away, to pick up bathing suits and other items for a planned beach outing the next day. When she returned around 9:30 p.m., Asunta was no longer in the apartment. Rosario became worried because the little girl hadn't called or mentioned any plans to go out, which was unlike her. Thinking she may have gone to visit friends, Rosario started calling Asunta's friends and Alfonso, but nobody had seen her. Rosario was the last person known to have seen Asunta alive, which made her one of the first people the detectives questioned. At the station, she recalled the events of July 4th, the night of the first alleged attack. That evening, after they returned from the store, Asunta closed the front door but left the key in the lock. Rosario didn't notice and went to bed. Around 3 a.m., she was awakened by cries for help. Rushing to her daughter's room, she saw a large man pinning Asunta to the floor, apparently trying to strangle her. Rosario attacked the intruder, but he was strong and easily threw her against the wall. Fortunately, neither of them was seriously hurt, and the attacker fled. Rosario described him as a strong, middle-aged man dressed in black, wearing a mask and gloves, which made it impossible to give a more detailed description. Asunta told a friend what had happened, and even sent photos showing red marks on her neck. Her father, Alfonso, said that Asunta had struggled with depression for a long time and was taking medication prescribed by doctors. This was confirmed by her friends, as she had spoken to them about her experiences. Recently, she had seemed more positive, saying she was feeling much better. Despite the alleged attack, Rosario did not investigate further to understand what had happened to her daughter. She claimed she was concerned that involving the police would upset Asunta, given her fragile emotional state. This explanation was not very convincing. Over the years, Asunta had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital due to frequent suicidal thoughts. In addition, she was reportedly exhausted from the pressure of schoolwork and extra classes. According to the family's nanny, Rosario had recently become increasingly frustrated with Asunta. The girl was no longer meeting Rosario's expectations, and her academic performance had declined. Rosario had even started considering sending her to study in Poland. She did not mention any of this to the detectives, which raised suspicions. Investigators decided to look more closely into Rosario's actions, especially her visit to the country house on the day Asunta disappeared. As it turned out, when detectives arrived at the location, they found Asunta's body just 4 kilometers away. Rosario appeared shocked by their arrival and furious. She rushed to the second floor, seemingly trying to hide something. In a nearby trash can, detectives found a piece of orange rope identical to the one used to bind Asunta's hands and feet. They also discovered a black mask and gloves. All of these items were collected as evidence, but no fingerprints or DNA were recovered. The investigative committee carried out several autopsies. They did not measure the body temperature immediately, fearing it might compromise other evidence. As a result, the exact time of death couldn't be determined. Nevertheless, it was estimated that Asunta died around 8 p.m. The cause of death was suffocation. Her mouth and nose had been covered with a soft object, likely a pillow, cutting off her air supply and leading to unconsciousness and death. In addition, an autopsy revealed that Asunta had ingested at least 27 lorazepam pills on the day of her death, 9 times the normal dosage for an adult. Hair analysis confirmed that this was not the first time. Asunta had suffered previous overdoses over a period of 3 months, starting around the time of the first alleged break-in. It's important to note that overdosing on lorazepam can cause amnesia and loss of muscle control. The drug is commonly used to treat anxiety and insomnia. While Rosario had a prescription for it to treat her depression, it had never been prescribed for Asunta. No one could explain why the girl had access to the medication. Rosario claimed that the intruders drugged Asunta to make her forget the attack. Detectives reviewed CCTV footage from the area to trace Asunta's movements on the day she disappeared. Around 2:00 p.m., she visited her father, Alfonso. By 5:21 p.m., she returned home, and at 5:28 p.m., Rosario was seen arriving. At 6:20 p.m., a gas station camera recorded Rosario's green Mercedes heading toward the country house. In the footage, there was clearly a girl in the passenger seat, identified as Asunta. They were traveling in the direction where her body was later discovered. This new evidence completely contradicted Rosario's initial statements, making her the primary suspect in her daughter's death. She was questioned again. Rosario appeared fearful and ashamed, stating that she had failed to protect her adopted daughter. This time, she presented a different version of events. According to her, she and Asunta had gone to the country house together to collect swimsuits. When they arrived, Asunta refused to enter and chose to wait in the car while Rosario went inside to gather items and complete some minor tasks. She said the visit took longer than expected, and Asunta, wanting to go home to do her chores and rest, insisted on leaving. Rosario claimed she agreed and drove her daughter partway back, but dropped her off about a 20-minute walk from their apartment to avoid the narrow city streets. Police reviewed all CCTV footage from the outskirts of Santiago and found no images of Rosario returning her daughter. Instead, the only footage captured her leaving the country house alone around 9:00 p.m. Her account was riddled with contradictions and inconsistencies. During questioning, she displayed arrogance, emotional detachment, and showed no apparent remorse. She continued to insist that a masked man dressed in black was behind the attack. When police interviewed the Basterra family's neighbors, one recalled hearing screams during the night of the July attack. Another noted that the attacker had passed through an area with dogs, yet the dogs didn't bark, suggesting the intruder was someone familiar to them. These details made investigators increasingly suspicious that Rosario and Alfonso were involved in the murder of their adopted daughter. Police explored multiple theories regarding the first supposed break-in. Some believed Rosario had fabricated it to cover up a failed murder attempt, while others suspected both parents were involved from the beginning. Few still believed an outsider had been responsible. On September 24th, Rosario and Alfonso held a funeral for Asunta. Their behavior during the service was bizarre. They were even seen taking a selfie in front of the coffin. Due to the growing inconsistencies in her story, Rosario was arrested shortly after the funeral. By that time, detectives believed they had uncovered a possible motive. Witnesses had come forward with information about an incident that occurred 9 months before the murder, an event that may have marked the beginning of the tragic end. In January 2013, Rosario began an affair with a real estate agent named Manuel Garcia, whom she had hired to sell property. Manuel was married and made it clear he would not leave his family. He saw the relationship as a casual affair. Rosario accepted this, and their secret relationship continued. Meanwhile, her marriage with Alfonso rapidly deteriorated. She described him as boring, a man who overestimated his own importance. She called him insensitive, especially when compared to her lover. In February 2013, after Alfonso discovered messages from Rosario's lover on her phone, the couple divorced. Rosario remained in the apartment with Asunta, while Alfonso moved out. Rosario kept running her business and continued visiting the country house. Custody of Asunta was shared, and both parents retained the right to see her. After Asunta's parents divorced, she divided her time between her mother's and father's homes. Many observed that she was always especially close to her mother, while her relationship with her father seemed more distant. Still, Alfonso made efforts to grow closer to his daughter. He repeatedly told his ex-wife, Rosario, that they would always be connected through their adopted child. Could it be that Rosario, wanting to sever all ties with her ex-husband, chose to eliminate the one bond that kept them together, the innocent child? It was known that earlier that summer, Rosario had ended her relationship with her lover, Manuel. Alfonso had taken advantage of the situation, persuading Rosario to cut off ties with Manuel in exchange for his support, while Asunta was hospitalized. Rosario agreed. On September 21st, just days before Asunta's death, Rosario broke that promise and spent most of the day with Manuel, only returning home in the evening. This raised serious suspicions, especially given the timing. During the investigation, many theories were explored. One notable point raised by the defense was that male DNA had been found on Asunta's clothing, suggesting possible involvement of a man. Though it was argued that Rosario may not have acted alone, this theory was largely dismissed. Still, police expanded their investigation, collecting documents and lab samples in an attempt to trace the male DNA found on Asunta's body. Initially, Alfonso was a person of interest, but then the focus shifted to Manuel. He had a solid alibi and no clear motive, and he was quickly ruled out. To everyone's surprise, the DNA was matched to a man named Ramira, a Colombian citizen living in Madrid, about a 6-hour drive from Santiago. The revelation was baffling. When questioned, Ramira denied any connection to the case, stating he had never even visited Santiago. His alibi was confirmed. At the time of the incident, he had been having dinner with his girlfriend at a restaurant in Madrid, and security footage confirmed this. So how did his DNA end up on Asunta's clothes? Further examination showed that only partial traces belonged to Ramira. Lab technicians suggested the possibility of sample contamination or poor quality collection. There were even whispers that someone might have intentionally tampered with the DNA evidence to mislead the investigation. At this point, detectives began entertaining even the most far-fetched scenarios. Rosario and Alfonso both seemed strangely indifferent about the loss of their daughter. Rosario, being the last person to see Asunta alive, became the media's prime suspect. Though she appeared fragile, investigators doubted she had the physical strength to move and stage the body by herself. The police tried to determine both Rosario's and Alfonso's locations during the time of the crime using cell tower data, but both of their phones had been turned off. This only fueled the detectives' suspicions. When questioned, Rosario claimed the timing was a coincidence, that both phones had run out of battery at the same time, and they had nothing to hide. A major turning point came after detectives spoke with a local pharmacist who happened to be a friend of Rosario's. They discovered that Rosario first contacted the pharmacist on July 5th, just one day after the supposed home invasion involving Asunta. From that point forward, Rosario began purchasing large quantities of lorazepam. Considering all this, police made the decision to arrest Alfonso Basterra. Teachers at Asunta's school had observed odd behavior in the girl. One day, she showed up to her violin lesson accompanied by her father and seemed disoriented and unable to control her movements. Alfonso brushed it off, saying she had taken allergy medicine. But this wasn't an isolated incident. Teachers noticed that Asunta, usually quiet and guarded, had begun showing signs of drowsiness and lethargy on several occasions. Each time, her parents offered vague explanations, often citing her health. But one teacher, growing increasingly suspicious, described symptoms that aligned with the known side effects of lorazepam. 2 days before the tragedy, the final suspicious incident occurred. On that day, Rosario informed one of Asunta's teachers that her daughter couldn't attend class due to a severe reaction to prescription medication. Upon hearing this, detectives became convinced that the adoptive parents had been fully aware of the medication and were likely attempting to poison Asunta. Although Rosario and Alfonso were officially divorced, Alfonso was still determined to win her back. In June 2013, just 3 months before the murder, Rosario suffered a nervous breakdown and was hospitalized. Seeing an opportunity, Alfonso moved back in, optimistic that a reconciliation was within reach. During this time, Rosario ended her affair with Manuel. At least, that's what she told him. Alfonso visited her regularly in the hospital and took care of her after her release. Things seemed to be improving. But later it was revealed that Rosario had lied. She had continued seeing her lover and even spent time with him on the day of the murder. With this new context, investigators proposed that Alfonso might have been seeking revenge. Perhaps he wanted Rosario to suffer the same kind of emotional pain he had endured. This theory could explain how the orange rope, the same type used to tie Asunta, ended up in the trash at the country house. Maybe Alfonso had simply thrown it away, but there was one question that troubled detectives. Why did Rosario react with such panic when the police arrived at the house? Why did she rush upstairs and check the trash? It strongly suggested she knew what was there and was likely involved. Another clue emerged. Whenever Alfonso was alone in the house with Rosario and Asunta, the girl appeared to have been drugged with lorazepam. When questioned, Alfonso refused to explain these instances, only maintaining his innocence. After her arrest, Rosario's behavior fluctuated wildly, between bouts of hysteria and deep depression. Meanwhile, Alfonso remained eerily calm and composed. He continually tried to reassure Rosario, telling her they simply needed to love and support each other, and that everything would be fine. But behind his soothing tone, detectives noticed a cold and calculating demeanor. A major breakthrough came when investigators examined Alfonso's laptop. They found that the hard drive had been completely replaced. Experts later discovered that the original drive had stored over 500,000 files, including photos and videos, many of them suspicious. On social media, Alfonso was shown to have an obsessive interest in Asian girls. He had dozens of conversations and interactions with girls who appeared to be minors. Additionally, he followed adult Asian women who looked extremely young. Later, a woman who ran an escort service came forward. She revealed that Alfonso had been a regular client and always requested Asian women, specifically asking them to dress as schoolgirls. Even Rosario was reportedly aware of this disturbing preference. More alarmingly, police uncovered photographs of Asunta wearing revealing outfits, further intensifying the suspicion of abuse. The prosecutor painted a horrifying portrait of Alfonso, not as the quiet, reserved man he appeared to be, but as someone capable of manipulating and harming his own daughter. Prosecutors argued that Rosario and Alfonso were covering for each other, and both were complicit in Asunta's death. But the motive remained chillingly unclear. When pressed by investigators, both Rosario and Alfonso refused to answer any more questions without their lawyers. Eventually, following legal advice, they stopped commenting altogether. Forensic psychiatrists played a crucial role in building the case. After analyzing the couple's behavior, experts described Rosario and Alfonso as narcissists with pronounced personality disorders. According to them, the couple had adopted Asunta not out of compassion, but as a means of fulfilling a social image of the perfect family, especially under pressure from Rosario's parents. Once Asunta no longer served that image, she became expendable. First, they used her, and then they got rid of her. A crucial testimony came from a 15-year-old acquaintance of Asunta. Although Alfonso claimed he had stayed at home until the evening on the day of the murder, the girl testified that she saw him around 6 p.m. near Rosario's house. This was later confirmed by surveillance footage. Alfonso was also captured on camera again at 9 p.m., after Asunta had already disappeared. These inconsistencies further damaged the couple's credibility. The trial was one of the most controversial in Spain's recent history. Even the judge came under scrutiny. Many believed he was seeking publicity, and those suspicions were later confirmed when he published a book about the case shortly after the verdict was delivered. Relatives and neighbors of the Basterra family had long watched as the adoptive parents appeared to dedicate themselves to creating the best possible environment for Asunta. They were financially stable, ambitious, and known for their strong personalities. Despite their often cold exterior, those close to the family witnessed what seemed to be genuine devotion to the girl. Even after the trial, many continued to believe that the verdict was a miscarriage of justice. In court, Rosario and Alfonso consistently maintained their innocence. Alfonso remained calm and rational throughout the proceedings, while Rosario frequently cried, displayed signs of hysteria, and gave confused and inconsistent testimony. She often blamed her erratic behavior on the effects of medication. A particularly revealing moment came when Rosario's cousin took the stand and shared previously unknown information. According to her, Rosario's parents had both died suddenly at home in 2011 and 2012, under circumstances she believed to be suspicious. The cousin claimed Rosario may have been involved in the deaths of both her parents, and later her daughter, in order to inherit the family estate. The defense dismissed this theory. Rosario's mother died at the age of 77 and her father at 88, both reportedly passing away peacefully in their sleep. No anomalies were noted by doctors at the time. But, as with Asunta, both parents were cremated, making it impossible to conduct further forensic analysis. Meanwhile, the prosecution presented a darker theory, that Rosario and Alfonso were sociopaths. Alfonso, they argued, had a pedophilic fixation and had been drugging Asunta, potentially recording the abuse. Asunta may have become a liability, a child old enough to understand and possibly expose what was happening, prompting the decision to silence her permanently. This theory was backed by a large collection of disturbing evidence, including photos and social media activity that showed Alfonso's obsession with very young Asian girls. It was suspected that Rosario either enabled or willfully ignored this behavior. Another possibility was that Rosario, overwhelmed by pressure and no longer seeing Asunta as useful, had conspired with Alfonso to eliminate her. On October 30, 2015, the court found both Rosario Porto and Alfonso Basterra guilty of the murder of Asunta. Each was sentenced to 18 years in prison. They later filed appeals, but these were rejected. Tragically, on November 18, 2020, Rosario was found dead in her prison cell, with a belt around her neck. It was her third suicide attempt, and this time, it was fatal. Alfonso remains incarcerated to this day, continuing to proclaim his innocence. In the aftermath of one of Spain's most haunting modern tragedies, the story of Asunta Basterra Porto continues to stir a complex mix of sorrow, outrage, and disbelief. The girl, adopted as a baby from China by an affluent and seemingly devoted couple, became a symbol of opportunity and hope, only for her life to end under deeply disturbing circumstances. The trial of Rosario Porto and Alfonso Basterra unearthed unsettling contradictions, chilling evidence, and countless unanswered questions. Both parents, once celebrated for their social standing and intelligence, were exposed as individuals who may have manipulated the perception of a picture-perfect family to conceal something far more sinister. Investigators unearthed evidence of prolonged drug use, forged timelines, inconsistent testimonies, and disturbing behavior that collectively painted a portrait of cold calculation rather than parental care. Rosario, a respected lawyer and daughter of a diplomat, and Alfonso, a journalist with a quiet demeanor, had constructed a narrative around Asunta's well-being. She was presented to the outside world as a gifted, cultured, and happy child, immersed in music, languages, and academics. Yet behind closed doors, her reality appeared alarmingly different. Medical records and school observations revealed episodes of drug-induced lethargy, emotional distress, and troubling interactions with both parents. Her father's digital history, laden with disturbing interests and erased data, further deepened the mystery surrounding his intentions. Her mother's erratic behavior and emotional volatility pointed to psychological instability, raising further concerns about the true motivations behind their roles as caregivers. Throughout the investigation and subsequent trial, both Rosario and Alfonso maintained their innocence. Rosario's defense leaned heavily on her fragile mental state and the alleged trauma of past events, while Alfonso portrayed himself as a rational, grieving father wrongfully accused. Neither could offer satisfactory explanations for the most damning elements of the case. Surveillance footage contradicted their statements. Digital evidence undermined their timelines. Forensic results revealed deliberate and repeated administration of sedatives. All signs seemed to suggest that Asunta's fate had been sealed long before the night she disappeared. The public, media, and even courtroom observers were left to grapple with a crucial question. Why? Why would two educated, successful individuals who had once fought to bring this child into their lives ultimately orchestrate her death? While theories ranged from psychological disorders to a desire to erase shared responsibilities after a bitter divorce, no singular motive could explain the depth of betrayal. Some posited that Asunta, now on the cusp of adolescence, had become a threat, either as a witness to abuse or as a burden to a crumbling facade of perfection. Others believed that power, control, or even resentment might have driven the fatal act. The truth remains elusive. Perhaps the most unsettling element of the case lies in its layers of ambiguity. Rosario's erratic actions, her cries, her anger, her silence, never aligned cleanly with guilt or innocence. Alfonso's disturbing digital trail and cold demeanor cast a shadow that, to many, felt inescapable. Yet the legal process could not conclusively determine who, between them, played the dominant role in the crime, or whether both acted in concert. The final verdict sentenced them equally, but the emotional weight of culpability remained uneven in the court of public opinion. Asunta's death did not simply mark the tragic loss of a young life. It shattered the illusion that education, wealth, and status inherently protect children from harm. It exposed the ease with which appearances can deceive, and the horrifying consequences that can follow when a child becomes invisible behind the mask of social respectability. For years, Asunta had shown signs of distress, crying out through behavior, drawings, conversations with friends, but her voice was either misunderstood or ignored. The very people who should have fought to understand and protect her instead became the architects of her suffering. In the years following the trial, Rosario's eventual suicide added a final, devastating chapter to the saga. Her death offered no new answers, only more speculation and grief. Alfonso remains in prison, unyielding in his claim of innocence, yet irreversibly linked to one of Spain's most disturbing crimes. The aftermath has left behind not just a devastated extended family, but also a society forced to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, power, and the complexity of justice. Ultimately, the story of Asunta Basterra Porto endures not just as a tale of murder, but as a haunting reminder of how fragile innocence can be, especially when placed in the hands of those who seem least likely to betray it. As the years pass, her name continues to evoke sorrow, and her memory compels us to ask hard questions. How do we see the warning signs before it's too late? How do we ensure children are heard when they cry out in silence? And how do we make sure that justice serves not only the law, but also the lost voices of those who can no longer speak for themselves?